Ji Chang Wook has spent years looking like the kind of actor audiences trust too easily. He carries the face of a romantic lead, the stillness of a polished star, and the kind of calm screen presence that makes people feel safe before he has even said a word. That image still works now. In Welcome to Samdal-ri, he returned as a warm, familiar leading man on Netflix, while Gangnam B-Side pushed him into darker crime thriller territory on Disney+. Even when the roles change, the aura stays the same. Dependable, elegant, almost too clean to fail. That is exactly why the crack mattered. In early 2024, a behind-the-scenes video tied to Welcome to Samdal-ri sparked backlash after Ji Chang Wook was seen using an electronic cigarette indoors. The reaction was strong enough that his agency, Spring Company, issued a formal apology, saying he recognized his behavior was improper and felt sorry for disappointing people. On paper, it was not the kind of scandal that destroys a career, but for someone with Ji Chang Wook's image, it hit harder than the act itself. Men like him are not sold as dangerous, they are sold as safe. And once that kind of perfection slips, even slightly, the audience starts looking back at the whole myth differently. That is where this story begins. Not with a collapse, but with the first visible fracture. Ji Chang Wook was never a scandal star. He was something more fragile than that, a fantasy of reliability. And sometimes, for men built on softness, trust, and near-perfect control, the smallest crack can feel more unsettling than a fall. Because once the spotless image breaks, what remains is no longer just a star. It is a man the public has to learn to see again. Before Ji Chang Wook became the kind of leading man audiences could project romance onto so easily, his life was much smaller, quieter, and harder than the image people now associate with him. He lost his father when he was young and was raised by his mother, a reality he later spoke about with a kind of softness that explains a lot about the emotional texture people sense in him even now. He did not grow up inside glamour. He grew up inside absence, responsibility, and the closeness of a small family trying to keep moving after loss. That matters because Ji Chang Wook's image has always looked almost too clean, too gentle, too easy to idealize. But underneath that softness was someone who had already learned very early that life could become unstable without warning. Long before he was a fantasy on screen, he was simply a son trying to grow up without one of the central figures who should have been there. When he entered the entertainment world, it did not happen with the force of instant stardom. He studied performing arts and began in musical theater, which is important because it explains why his screen presence later felt more disciplined than flashy. Before major dramas, there were small beginnings. The 2006 short film days, minor television work, and then the 2008 film Sleeping Beauty. None of that made him famous. None of that made him look inevitable. If anything, his early years in the industry carried the uncertainty of someone who could easily have remained unnoticed. In 2009, My Two Perfect Sons gave him broader visibility, and that mattered because it let the public begin seeing him not as a background face, but as someone who could hold emotional space on screen. Even then, though, Ji Chang Wook did not feel like a star everyone was racing to crown. He felt more fragile than that. Talented, attractive, watchable, but still unproven, still soft enough that the industry could have swallowed him without leaving much behind. The real turning point came with Smile Again. In 2010, Ji Chang Wook took his first lead role in the daily drama, playing a short-track speed skater, and the show became a major success, topping the ratings chart for 15 consecutive weeks. It also brought him one of his first major recognitions, winning Best Actor in a Daily Drama at the KBS Drama Awards. But what matters most here is not just the award. It is the emotional shape of the transformation. Before Smile Again, Ji Chang Wook was a young actor still trying to prove he belonged. After it, he finally looked like someone with a path. The boy who had once seemed too quiet, too gentle, maybe even too delicate for the brutality of the industry, had found the role that made the industry look back at him seriously. And that is what makes this part of his story so important. Ji Chang Wook did not arrive as a born superstar. He arrived slowly, carrying grief, patience, and a softness that could easily have been mistaken for weakness. until the camera finally revealed that softness was one of the reasons people could not stop watching him. The rise did not happen all at once. It happened in steps, and each step made Ji Chang Wook harder to ignore. Smile Again was the first time the industry had to stop treating him like a minor face in the background. It gave him his first lead role, turned him into a familiar presence for a mass audience, stayed at the top of the ratings for 15 consecutive weeks, and brought him a major early acting award at the KBS Drama Awards. Then came Warrior Baek Dong-soo, which kept that momentum alive and topped its time slot for 13 weeks, proving that Smile Again had not been luck. This was the moment Ji Chang Wook stopped looking fragile in the eyes of the industry. The soft-faced young actor who once seemed easy to overlook had found something more dangerous than beauty: momentum. And once momentum begins attaching itself to a face like his, the audience starts doing more than noticing. It starts believing. The real breakthrough, though, came when his image deepened. Empress Ki changed the scale of Ji Chang Wook's career because it gave him something heavier than simple likability. The Korea Times described the drama as his breakthrough, noting that by the time the series ended, his performance had left one of the strongest impressions on critics and fans. Suddenly, he was no longer just a rising actor with charm. He was a performer who could carry weakness, obsession, jealousy, vulnerability, and power all inside the same role. Then Healer pushed that transformation even further. After the drama aired, his popularity surged in China and across other parts of Asia, with reporting at the time noting both enormous online viewership and a rapid expansion of his overseas fan base. That is when Ji Chang Wook stopped being simply promising. He became exportable fantasy, the kind of Korean male lead international audiences could fall for instantly: beautiful, wounded, capable, and just distant enough to feel unreachable. By the time the K2 arrived, the myth was almost complete. Ji Chang Wook had become the kind of actor people no longer watched neutrally. They projected onto him. Soompi noted in 2016 that he had already earned the nickname action drama expert, and that label mattered because it sealed two fantasies at once. He was not only romantic, he was competent, not only beautiful but dangerous, not only soft but able to protect. Korea Times reported that the K2 finished with a 5.5% rating on cable, a strong number in that space, and by then the image around him had hardened into something very powerful. Ji Chang Wook was no longer just popular, he was easy to idealize. The audience did not simply admire him, it trusted the feeling he gave them. And that is exactly what made the next phase of his story so delicate. Because once a star becomes loved not just for talent, but for the illusion of safety, even a small crack can feel much larger than it really is. The pressure in Ji Chang Wook's story did not come from a giant scandal. It came from something quieter, and in some ways more dangerous for an actor like him: the burden of staying spotless for too long. By the time he enlisted on August 14, 2017, he had already become one of the most easily idealized leading men in Korean drama. Then the screen went silent. He served in the military and was discharged on April 27, 2019, which meant that the version of Ji Chang Wook fans remembered had been frozen in place for nearly 2 years. That kind of absence does strange things to an image. It does not always weaken it. Sometimes it hardens it. When he returned, he was not just coming back as an actor. He was coming back as a memory people had protected in their heads. The handsome, reliable, romantic action star they had not had to see age, change, or fail in real time. And that is where the pressure really began. The question was no longer whether Ji Chang Wook could still work. The question was whether he could live inside an image that had become almost too clean to touch. That is why his next phase matters so much. Instead of staying safely inside the old fantasy, Ji Chang Wook started moving into darker worlds. The Worst of Evil put him into a brutal undercover story on Disney+, and Gangnam B-side pushed him even deeper into a night world of crime and corruption. Then The Manipulated continued that movement, placing him inside another revenge thriller space rather than a soft, romantic frame. This shift was not accidental. It felt like the work of an actor trying to dirty an image the public had polished too perfectly. because there is a trap in being loved the way Ji Chang Wook was loved. Once audiences decide you are the safe one, the beautiful one, the dependable one, the man they can trust without effort, every future role risks becoming a repetition of the same dream. So these darker projects mattered not just as career choices, but as acts of resistance. They suggested that Ji Chang Wook understood something crucial about his own myth. If he stayed too beautiful for too long, the image would eventually become a prison. And then, in early 2024, the crack finally became visible in public. A behind-the-scenes video from Welcome to Samdal-ri included footage of Ji Chang Wook smoking an electronic cigarette indoors. The scene sparked backlash, the clip was ultimately removed, and his agency Spring Company issued a formal apology, saying he recognized that his behavior was improper and was sorry for disappointing people. On paper, it was a small controversy. Compared with the kinds of scandals that ruin celebrity careers, it barely looked like one at all. But that is exactly why it hit so precisely. Ji Chang Wook was never built as a dangerous star. He was built as a safe one. So when the public saw even a minor breach in that image, the reaction felt bigger than the act itself. It was not really about smoking. It was about the first visible failure of the fantasy. For years, people had looked at Ji Chang Wook and seen control, kindness, gentleness, and emotional safety. Now, suddenly, they had to see something else, a man who could disappoint them. And maybe that was the real pressure he had been moving toward all along. Not the fear of collapse, but the fear of becoming ordinary in front of people who had spent years needing him to feel better than ordinary. What makes Ji Chang Wook's recent chapter meaningful is that it does not feel like a return to the old fantasy. It feels like an exit from it. Welcome to Samdal-ri proved that he could still hold the kind of warm, emotionally safe leading man space audiences had loved in him for years. But it also arrived at a moment when that image no longer felt complete on its own. The series ran from late 2023 into early 2024 and kept him visible to a broad audience, almost like a reminder that the softness was still there. But softness was no longer the whole story. By this point, Ji Chang Wook was not simply protecting the image that made him famous. He was starting to place that image beside darker, rougher, less comforting versions of himself. That difference matters, because a true payoff is not when a star returns unchanged. It is when the audience realizes the old version was never going to be enough forever. That is why the shift into projects like Gangnam B-Side and The Manipulated feels so important. Gangnam B-Side, released on Disney Plus in November 2024, put him inside a crime thriller world built on night, corruption, and danger rather than romance or emotional reassurance. Then, The Manipulated, released in 2025 on Disney Plus, pushed him further into revenge thriller territory, with a story centered on a man framed for a heinous crime who comes back to pursue violent payback. These choices suggest something bigger than genre variety. They suggest intent. Ji Chang Wook seems to understand that the image which once made him easy to love could eventually make him too easy to predict. So instead of staying trapped in the role of the beautiful, reliable man everyone wants to trust, he has started moving toward characters that feel bruised, darker, and morally less comfortable. That is how actors escape myth without publicly declaring war on it. They make the audience adjust its expectations one role at a time. So maybe that is the real ending of Ji Chang Wook's story, at least for now. Not a fall, not a redemption arc, but a release. For years, the public loved him as a fantasy of safety, the handsome man who could fight, suffer, love, and still seem emotionally clean by the end of the story. But that kind of beauty can become a cage if it lasts too long. What makes him more interesting now is that he no longer seems content to remain inside it. He is still recognizably Ji Chang Wook, still polished, still magnetic, still carrying the face that made people idealize him so easily. But now there is something else next to it, a willingness to look less perfect, less comforting, and more human. And maybe that is the best possible payoff for someone like him. Because the goal was never to stay flawless forever. The goal was to survive the moment flaw finally became visible, and then keep going anyway. That is what Ji Chang Wook seems to be doing now, not trying to become the perfect man again, but becoming a more complete one.